All right, what's up, everybody? We are here to talk about the 49ers loss to the Minnesota Vikings, 23-17. They're 1-1 on the season. Um, Kyle is not here. Kyle is traversing back on his way from Southern California. Took a little weekend to himself. Um, Frankly, I think he needed it given all of his various responsibilities and jobs. So Kyle will be back later this week. But for now, we're going to talk about this game against the Vikings. I think ultimately my initial takeaway was that the 49ers were just not good enough in all three phases. Some were obviously worse than others. What stands out to me initially is that the defense pretty bad overall, save for a couple of Fred Warner takeaways deep in 49ers territory. If not for those two plays, 49ers might have gotten blown out. Both their touchdowns came after they got the ball via those takeaways. And obviously they took points off the board from Minnesota. And again, that they lost by 6. So who knows what we're talking about if Fred Warner doesn't make that sort of diving, leaping, reaching interception on Sam Darnold. And I believe that was the second quarter. And then, forces the fumble in the second half. Um, Aside from that, the numbers are pretty bad. There isn't really any way to sugarcoat it. Like the Vikings with Sam Darnold at quarterback, missing their number 2 receiver for the entire game, missing Justin Jefferson for a portion of the game, missing their starting tight end TJ Hawkinson for the entire game. 403 yards of offense, 7 of 12 on a third down. It looked like the Niners were in a really good spot after they made it a 6-point game in the fourth quarter. I think there were about 10 minutes left. All they had to do was get a stop there with Justin Jefferson out of the game on top of the other weapons they were missing. And the 49ers would have had a chance to take the lead and win the game. And I was having the thought that, man, that stat where the 49ers never come from behind when they're down by 13 or more in the fourth quarter of games under Kyle Shanahan, they still have never won a game under those circumstances. I thought that was going to come to an end, honestly. But the 49ers defense couldn't get a stop. And it was really, really surprising that the 49ers defense in that spot was unable to get a stop there. So that's the first takeaway. The offense simply wasn't good enough. And particularly on important downs. They were 2 of 10 on third down, 1 of 3 on fourth down. I didn't really have a problem with Kyle Shanahan going for it on the 3 fourth downs that he did. Particularly given, when you're at the 2-yard line, you don't get it there. You have Minnesota backed up. Obviously, you're not planning on allowing a 98-yard touchdown to Justin Jefferson. And that was problematic in of itself, but offensively, 6 sacks, 2 turnovers. The play where the ball just slips out of Brock Purdy's hand. I had no idea what to make of that. That was just odd. It felt like Brian Flores, the Vikings defensive coordinator, just had the upper hand on Kyle Shanahan throughout the game. And Brock Purdy mentioned it. I just finished watching his press conference in Minnesota. Purdy was talking about all the disguises that Minnesota's defense was showing, and they clearly had the Niners offense confused. And they looked confused, frankly. Brock Purdy, for the most part, the protection looked okay. There were a lot of plays where it looked like Brock Purdy had as much time as he could have needed in the pocket. But whatever was happening downfield prevented the ball from coming out in a timely manner, and the 49ers took 6 sacks. And I think, that was obviously a big culprit in them not being nearly as effective as they needed to be on third down. You can talk about Christian McCaffrey not being there. Maybe the Niners win if they have CMC. Who knows? But I didn't come out of that game being like, oh, if they have Christian McCaffrey, they're fine. The Niners aren't going to go undefeated, right? We knew they weren't going to go 17-0 this season, despite whatever the roster looks like. Despite the fact that they seem still pretty clearly like one of the top teams in the NFC, given all the talent they have and the infrastructure with Kyle Shanahan and everything. So you're gonna lose some of these games. But I think what's unique about this game is it felt like the 49ers were outplayed in all 3 phases pretty considerably, and we haven't said that about too many games that they've had, right? Like, even last year when they lost in Minnesota and Cleveland and it felt like they were going through a bad stretch, it was, well, Christian McCaffrey's banged up, Deebo Samuel's out, Trent Williams is out. This is all pretty explainable, just via circumstance. This one, the explanation isn't that they were missing Christian McCaffrey in my mind. The explanation was they got outplayed. And defensively, especially, like, to hear Diamador Lenore talk during the week about how Sam Darnold's going to give them plenty of interception opportunities. Maybe he will, but how often do we see in the NFL when a defensive player says something about an opposing quarterback the week before a game and it comes back to bite them, and whatever they said turned out not to be true, and turned out that, oh, that quarterback got the better of that defensive player. And I'm not gonna say that Diamador Lenore, what he said was emblematic of the entire defense's feeling about Sam Darnold, but it certainly didn't look like the 49ers didn't take Sam Darnold for granted. Like, it didn't seem like they were had the appropriate fear, right? You hear Steve Kerr, the Warriors coach, talk about appropriate fear all the time. Didn't feel like the 49ers had an appropriate fear of Sam Darnold based on how the game turned out and based on the way the defense played. Particularly given the Vikings were missing their top 2 receivers late in the game. Justin Jefferson obviously had his way the first 3 quarters until leaving. But, there's no way that the Vikings are more talented than the Niners. And I do think Kevin O'Connell deserves a ton of credit, the Vikings head coach. The Niners were outcoached today on both sides of the ball. Brian Flores clearly had Brock Purdy's head spinning a little bit with all the disguises. Kyle Shanahan didn't have much of an answer in terms of schematics. You didn't see a whole lot of play action. Um, you didn't see, the running game really didn't work after halftime. Jordan Mason, I think, had 8 carries for 28 yards in the second half after having 72 yards in the first. The running game just wasn't there. And I get you're playing from behind, but the running game just wasn't nearly as efficient. And the Vikings did a really good job at taking that away. And then on top of their disguises in the passing game, 49ers just really didn't have answers. And look, we can't ignore the fact that it's a pretty tough look when the 49ers offense is struggling and Brandon Ayuk has 1 catch for 2 yards for the vast majority of the game. Right? There's just no getting around the fact that, Brandon Ayuk hasn't been an all-pro like he was last year for the first 2 weeks of the season. And there's no getting around the fact that he missed all of training camp and that maybe his chemistry with Brock Purdy isn't there, and maybe he hasn't looked good enough in the very limited amount of practice time that he's had to be, featured in Kyle Shanahan's game plan to the point that he's gonna be the first or second read on every single play. And our buddy Nick Wagner, ESPN, texted us during the game. He was in the press box watching, obviously, and said the Vikings were bracketing Brandon Ayuk a lot. And what's one thing we've said about the Niners and why we think they should be so good? They have so much talent that if you bracket one guy between, Deebo Samuel and George Kittle and, now Jordan Mason, who's been pretty efficient overall in the first 2 weeks, you should be able to survive your best receiver getting bracketed and double covered. That's kind of the point. That's why you have all these weapons, right? So the 49ers were outcoached today. Kyle Shanahan was definitely outcoached. He was outfoxed by Brian Flores. And now, look, and I'm not trying to overreact because it's one loss. And look, even the 49ers can go, 12-5. They're going to have 4 more of these, right? So it's not crazy that they lose a game in week 2. But what did we see in the Super Bowl? It was third down, right? Offensively, it was third down that cost the 49ers the Super Bowl, more or less. their inability to convert third downs when they needed to. Didn't have any problem moving the ball. Moving the ball was not the issue for the vast majority of the game. And look, Brock Purdy's numbers today: 319 yards, 28 of 36. He completed 78% of his throws. That ball that slipped out of his hand was ruled a fumble, not an interception, so that would have changed his quarterback rating pretty substantially. But 101.3 passer rating, took 6 sacks. But the Niners moved the ball. The Niners still had 399 yards of offense and averaged 6 yards a play. The problem is the Vikings averaged 7.5 yards per play and were 7 of 12 on third down. And now you go back to week 1. You know, it kind of felt like a throwaway stat, right? The Jets converted 6 of 10 on third down on Monday Night Football, and the Niners kind of blowout win. The Vikings go 7 of 12. And so now you have a scenario where in the first 2 weeks of the season, the Niners defense, which we expect to be one of the best in the league, has allowed 14 of 22, well over 50%, third downs converted. Which, if you extrapolate that out to a full season, I'm guessing that would be the worst in the league. And obviously, it's 2 games, it's a small sample size. But the Niners defense, the point stands, has not nearly been good enough on third down. Special teams also bad. You want to talk about the Super Bowl, right? You had a missed field goal in the Super Bowl. You had a muff punt in the Super Bowl that led to a Chiefs touchdown. Second possession of the game today, Niners punt. Mitch Wishnowsky has it blocked. For whatever reason, our guy Mitch, shout out to the Santa Barbara City College Vaqueros, our guy Mitch does not touch the guy down, and he goes and runs for 20 or 30 yards, whatever it was, sets up a field goal. The Niners, frankly, felt like they were pretty lucky to just give up a field goal there. Those were the first points of the game. If that's a touchdown, it probably feels way different. But, you know, you allow a block punt, and then your defense holds up, and you give up a field goal, you're feeling okay about that. You muff a punt in the fourth quarter, I guess third quarter. It didn't feel like, I mean, that was pretty lucky, right? And you do wonder, you know, that's sort of how these things go with punt returners and a rookie, particularly in Jacob Cowing. You know, does that shake his confidence? Niners are very fortunate to recover that muff punt. It's a 50-50 scenario right there, right? And then they get the turnover later. Or sorry, the Vikings get the interception, I think, on the next play or the two snaps later. But you think about, like, what wins and what loses you football games. The 49ers were outplayed on offense, on defense, and on special teams, and they lost by 6. But it's also worth noting, had Fred Warner not had those 2 takeaways, the Niners probably get blown out. And so now the question is that a harbinger of things to come? A classic cliche. Or is that Niners on a short week, traveling halfway across the country after playing on Monday night, don't have Christian McCaffrey? Was that kind of a circumstance, rest loss, right? A lot is made. The 49ers have one of the worst schedules in the league, like they did last year, in terms of having rest disadvantage. Definitely had a rest disadvantage this week with Minnesota playing on Sunday in the Meadowlands and then returning home for their home opener. But at some point, excuses, those types of excuses just don't really hold a lot of water. Right. And every NFL team has bad schedule circumstances. Niners didn't go to London. Right. This game wasn't played in Brazil. You know, they had a short week. They had to go to Minnesota after hosting a Monday night game to open the season. Like it's not a huge injustice to go play a road game in Minnesota after on a short week. Like, that's just what happens in the league. You can go through every single team's schedule and point to different different circumstances. That might not be ideal, but this is why you have such a good roster. Like that's the point. You have a good roster and a good coach so you can overcome things like this. Um so I don't think the sky is falling here necessarily. The Ravens lost at home to the Raiders today. The Cowboys lost at home to the Saints. Um just a weird Sunday. I know I'm missing one. The Lions lost at home to the Buccaneers. Those are like, four teams that were pretty heavily favored today that we consider, quote unquote contenders that we think are going to be in the mix that lost games today. So it happens in the league. But losses like this, I think what they do is raise questions, right? How do we feel about Nick Sorensen, the first time defensive coordinator who, I mean, let's be honest, Kevin O'Connell had his way with him. On that last drive, I can't reiterate enough how the 49ers defense, when it becomes a one-score game with 10 minutes left after Jordan Mason's touchdown, I cannot reiterate how unacceptable it is that the 49ers don't get a stop there. With Justin Jefferson in the locker room getting his quad looked at, with Jordan Addison not in the game, with TJ Hawkinson not in the game. The Niners defense in that spot many times, many times since they've become contenders in 2019 have come up big, and then the 49ers have been able to get the ball back, and then you can say, man, wasn't a perfect game, but they came away with a win. Not today. Not today. And Kevin O'Connell took Nick Sorensen's lunch. With that bunch formation on, what was it, 3rd and 7? Bunch formation on the right side, man-to-man coverage. You think, all right, Niners are getting off the field here. They're going to get the ball back. Plenty of time to go down and potentially take the lead with a touchdown. Kevin O'Connell sets up a wide open pitch and catch for an easy first down to a receiver none of us who watch the Niners have really ever heard of. Just kind of like a scheme advantage, right? And then Sam Darnold also had the back shoulder throw on the guy up the seam. It was between three guys in coverage, but none of them were like particularly close. They were all sort of adjacent to the Vikings receiver who made that catch, 27-yard catch on 3rd and 10, 3rd and long, whatever it was. If you're a championship defense, your performance on that series in particular is eating at you all week until you play the Rams. It's just unacceptable. Like that's not, like the Fred Warner, Nick Bosa championship defense. If this is a defense that's going to, be the backbone of the team that wins a Super Bowl, that's a drive they have to get a stop at. That they just have to. This is Sam Darnold at quarterback. Like, I think more highly of Sam Darnold than a lot of people, right? And I know people in the 49ers building, it's not lip service when they talk about how much they actually like Sam Darnold. Like Kyle Shanahan, when he talks about Sam Darnold, really believes it. And Sam Darnold went a long way today towards proving the type of faith the 49ers have in Sam Darnold as like, starting quarterback in this league. The Niners unquestionably believe he's a starter in this league. And today, I think he went a long way towards proving that he can play at that level. Irrespective of all that, the Niners defense just has to get off the field there. So that's a takeaway for me. And again, Brian Flores, Vikings defensive coordinator, really confusing the Niners. For me, like, you watch JT O'Sullivan's videos, and if you don't subscribe to the QB School on YouTube, I highly suggest you watch those videos and watch his breakdowns of Brock Purdy. One thing he says at least once in every video is that he doesn't love the Niners' traditional drop back passing game. And if you watch the 49ers offense closely, what they do so well is sequencing plays and being unpredictable and utilizing play action. And when the Niners offense is really clicking, they're able to, do runs and passes out of the same formations. They're able to do an outside zone run that might threaten for a touchdown, and then come back the next series and then do play action off of that same look, go the other way, misdirection, you have a big gain to George Kittle or Deebo Samuel on a crossing route, right? It just kind of felt like a lot of shotgun quick passing stuff today. You didn't get the play action bootleg zone stuff that we typically see from Kyle Shanahan. And to a certain extent, again, Brock Purdy threw for 319 yards and completed nearly 80% of his throws. He averaged almost 9 yards per attempt. But it never felt like the 49ers offense was in sequence. It never felt like it was in rhythm. And I think that has to do with the Vikings being really good against the run, particularly in the second half, and with them disguising what they did to defend the pass. And maybe if there's a chink in Kyle Shanahan's armor as an offensive coordinator and play designer, it's that when you have to line up in shotgun at 3rd and 8, you're not always going to have the best stuff. And, Deebo Samuel isn't known as a separator, right? That's not his skill set as a receiver. He's not known for his ability to beat man-to-man coverage. Brandon Ayuk is. George Kittle used to be, but I think it would probably be unfair with George Kittle at his age, given the responsibility he has in the running game and what he does as a blocker and all the injuries he's played through. Probably unfair to require George Kittle to be a separator in this offense, I would argue. Juwan Jennings, good separator, and that's why you see him targeted as often as he is in key situations, right? But if you, the reason why I brought up the JT O'Sullivan videos is he talks about not loving the Niners passing traditional drop back passing game, and I wonder if you see this show up in situations like this. You have to, when you're Kyle Shanahan and you're doing so much play action, you have to be able to run the ball and you have to play ahead of the sticks. Because unless you have Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen or one of these super elite quarterbacks, you're going to have a really hard time winning if you're in 3rd and long on the majority of your 3rd downs. Play action's not going to work on 3rd and 9. It's just not, right? You don't need to be a football guy to know that. Stephon White in the YouTube chat says the Vikings defense will disguise and fast, so rollouts and misdirection is a disadvantage against them. Terrible matchup for our offense, honestly. That's fair. That's fair. But you would think, given the talent on the roster with Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, and George Kittle, that should be enough to be better than 2 of 10 on 3rd down and 1 of 3 on 4th down. Right. So I just, you had sacks, penalties, inability to move the Vikings defense off the ball. So that's kind of my takeaway. And in a game like that where you're on the road in a hostile environment against a pretty decent team, I think the Vikings are decent. Like, it wouldn't surprise me at all if the Vikings ended up being a wild card team. I think it'd probably be a stretch to say they win the division, but I think they're going to be better than a lot of people expected. And I think we saw that today. But in a game where the margins are that slim, you can't have a blocked punt. And you can't muff a punt deep in your own territory either. And the Niners are lucky I know they recovered that, but that is what it is. Can't be dropping punts on the road. It's a great way to lose, especially in a 1-score game. So, I do think, and going back to the other side of the ball, the Nick Sorensen point, Robert Saleh, for a while, when he was a first-time coordinator early on in his career, caught a lot of heat, right? DeMeco Ryans maybe a little less so, but there were some times when DeMeco Ryans, it wasn't always clear to everybody based on the way the defense played that he was going to be, one of the best head coaching candidates we've seen in a little bit. I think it's okay to have patience with Nick Sorensen, but I also think it's okay for everyone's antennas to be up. Like, okay, it might be that this guy is over his skis and might not be a good defensive coordinator. And it might also be that it was his second game and he's gonna get better as time goes on. I'm open to both possibilities. Not gonna overreact, not gonna say, for Sorensen, there's no chance he can be good. I definitely think there's a chance he could be good. I also think there's a chance that he could be bad, and the 49ers are in the same position looking for a new DC next offseason. Because you remember, the 49ers wanted to hire Jeff Ulbrich. They've wanted to hire Vic Fangio. Like it wasn't like Nick Sorensen has been this guy burning a hole in their pocket as a coordinator candidate who was like, "Oh yeah, easy decision. We're not going to look elsewhere. We're just going to hire internally." It's like, no, Nick Sorensen was kind of a fallback option. So I just think it's worth keeping that in mind. And again, that's not to say I don't think he's going to be good. There's still a chance he is good, but he Kevin O'Connell worked him today. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And Brian Flores worked Kyle Shanahan today. I don't think there's any doubt about that. On top of the fact you had a blocked punt early in the game, lead to 3 points the other way, and it could have been a lot worse. So is the sky falling? No. Do the Niners have a lot to clean up? Yes. Are the Niners still a good team? Yes. Just like I think the Ravens are still a good team despite losing to the Raiders and starting out the season 0-2. Just like I think the Cowboys are probably going to be one of the best teams in the NFC despite losing to the Saints at home. I still think the Lions are a contender in the NFC despite losing to the Bucks. So what happens early in the season can sometimes be a misnomer for what happens later on in the year, right? Like the 49ers, was it 2021 or 2022? I forget. They all blend together. Lost week 1 to the Chicago Bears. Still ended up going to the NFC Championship game, right? Sometimes these things can happen. You lose games, but there are some concerning things. I don't remember honestly the last time where I came out of a 49ers loss and felt like, yeah, they were outplayed in all 3 phases. I don't remember that happening recently. It's felt like there have been, I don't want to say extenuating circumstances because that's another word for excuses, but there have been injury issues that you could point to and say, yeah, that's probably going to be difficult to overcome for any team. And it's hard to win every game in the NFL. We know that. So we'll see. That's why the NFL season is 17 weeks. We get a bigger sample to figure out what a team is, what a team isn't. And right now, all we really know about the Niners is they have an incredibly high ceiling, but they're 1-1. And that was a pretty ugly performance in Minnesota, coming off a short week against the Jets. So we'll see. Niners have to come back. They have another road game on the road next week against the LA Rams. I will be in the building for that one. Making the trek down. I will not be in the press box. Will be my first NFL game as a fan who bought a ticket since the Ravens Super Bowl in New Orleans, and I guess that would have been February 2013. So it's going to be odd. It's going to be odd for me, but I'm looking forward to it. I might have a beverage during an NFL game. I can't. That doesn't happen to me all that often. So looking forward to that, and I will be podcasting after that. So not too many beverages, but we're bringing the microphone down to LA. And we will be recording an episode after that game when the Niners play the Rams. Currently, speaking of the Rams, they're losing at halftime 24-3 in Arizona. I saw Marvin Harrison Jr. scored 2 touchdowns early. Yeah, he has 4 catches for 130 yards and 2 touchdowns in the first half against the Rams. The Cardinals are putting it on the Rams. 24-3 at halftime. So we'll see how that game finishes out. Kyle will be back for the next time we record this podcast. I appreciate you guys rocking with me as I ride solo. Try not to rant too much. Sometimes I know regular listeners, sometimes I'm self-conscious about how much I rant. So when I'm talking to myself on here for half hour at a time, Try not to be too ranty, but maybe that's just part of it. Come hang out with us October 12th at Cooperage. We're doing a live show. I believe it's our fourth consecutive year. There will be fundraising. There will be an auction item or two or three or four. Hopefully, we're trying to get some very cool items. Trying to get some special guests. Um, if you listen to the podcast we recorded late last week, Matt Mayoko hinted at maybe coming. He's currently deciding between the Candlestick Chronicles event at Cooperage and going up to hang out with his daughter, who goes to the University of Oregon, to watch my Ohio State Buckeyes play the Oregon Ducks. So I think that's a pretty good option. But if he doesn't do that, hopefully he can make it to Cooperage. So if you see Matt or want him to want to shoot him a note on X, formerly Twitter, or Instagram, or Threads, or even his YouTube channel, and tell him to go to that Cooperage event, feel free to do that. And yeah, shout out to Lamb Chops, our sponsor. Shout out to Cooperage, our sponsor. Go get that Candlestick Chronicles Hazy IPA. Todd, real quick, says in the YouTube chat, Niners haven't won in Minnesota in 30 years. I think 2 games is way, all caps, way too early for judgment on the new defensive coordinator. I think that's fair. I think that's fair. I just also think it's fair to point out that the DC wasn't very good today, and it shines a spotlight on him going forward because it proves that he has to improve. So maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. That's the beauty of an NFL season, is we have a bigger sample size to make conclusions, and ultimately the results will speak for themselves. So I think that's all. Thank you guys for rocking with me again. Subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Appreciate everyone in the chat today. Make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you are notified when we go live and when our videos publish. And we'll talk to you later in the week. Kyle will be back, and we will further dive into the state of the 49ers coming off their loss Sunday to the Minnesota Vikings to fall to 1-1. All right, see you guys.